So I'm originally from Dublin, but I've been living for about 30 years in Brussels. But this is where my heart is, so it's always really nice to come back, see the family. To give you an idea about my organisation, don't even try and read all this stuff, but what we do, we're a bit like Food Drink Ireland, but for Europe. So Food Drink Ireland would be part of our organisation, as would the FDF in the UK, and the French and the Germans and the Austrians and the Greeks, and all every EU member state will have a food federation, and they're all parts of my organisation. I also have direct and indirect membership of some 280,000 food industry businesses throughout Europe. So it's quite a large organisation, a difficult ship to steer sometimes. But we are Europe's largest manufacturing industry. We have a turnover in European food and drink industry of more than 1 trillion euros. We employ some 4.25 million employees directly. And across the food chain, if you take the farm and retail, etc., into account, it accounts for some 24 to 26 billion employees. All of this said, I was asked to talk about Brexit. In Brussels, there's a lot of Brexit fatigue at the moment, and in fact, you might have been interested in the Merkel-Schulz debate recently. Brexit wasn't mentioned once. In fact, there's a huge amount of fatigue in Brussels around Brexit. Everything is being said, and the opposite of everything has been said 5 minutes later. But we know that in Ireland this is not the case. It's a hugely important issue here in Ireland. However, if you look at the exchanges between the EU and the UK, this graph shows you that the UK is importing and exporting a hell of a lot more to the EU 27 than the EU 27 is to the UK. So there's a huge dependence on behalf of the UK for the EU 27 and not vice versa. Some of the sectors here, there's some figures. I can leave all of this with the organisers if anyone's interested in a copy. But as you can see, from an export point of view, wine is probably the most important product that is sold into the UK from the EU 27. And what the EU 27 imports mostly is spirits. So these two sectors will be very affected. So what now? So we all know about the Article 50 process, which was triggered on the 29th of March. There will be 3 negotiation stages. First, the divorce settlement. This whole exercise is proving very, very difficult because this is what the EU 27 wants. First, we talk about the settlement. Basically, it's 3 things. How much is the UK prepared to pay? What about citizen rights? And then the Irish border. In fact, I've been to talk to Barnier and his task force several times. The first time when he discovered I was Irish, he said, "Don't talk to me about Ireland." He said, "We've been talked to and at by the Irish government, by the Irish industry. In fact, I think they've done you proud." Everybody is aware of the, let's say, Irish problems, not only on the border, but also the problems facing the food industry. I think Paul and his colleagues, Ibec, Danny McCoy, they've been wearing out the soles of their shoes in Brussels, and they've done a really good job representing the industry. So after we get those 3 issues solved, there will be some sort of transitional arrangement, we hope. We're hearing between 2 to 4 years at the moment. And then there will be a deal, of course, on the long-term relationship. So as an industry, the whole of the European food and drink industry, what are we looking for? We're looking at the negotiators, asking them to treat our industry as a priority. Initially, people were talking about the car industry, they were talking about services, they were talking about energy, they were talking about practically everything except food. So we were banging on the doors. Finally, the point has got through, and in fact, they are taking the food and drink industry very seriously. I just have to pick up my phone and I can immediately get a meeting with the task force if we have an issue. We're asking the Commission to collaborate closely with us. They have started to do this. We want to be involved in shaping the transition period. we insist that they agree on a clear roadmap and realistic transition arrangements rapidly, because as we all know, the last thing that the industry needs is uncertainty. It can kill. Also going forward, we have to be very careful. It was mentioned this morning, there are, in fact, the real figure is more like 2,300 pieces of legislation directly affecting the food industry. And if these start to diverge between the UK and the EU 27, then we're really in trouble. So we're looking to ensure that there's minimum regulatory divergence. This nice slide was prepared by Professor Matthews of Trinity College, and in fact it shows a little bit about the impact of Brexit on trade and regulation post-Brexit. So as you go to the left, you remain more under the EU model, and as you go to the right, you're into the WTO model with most favoured nation tariffs coming in. So where we want to be as an industry is on the left. Next to that, there's the sort of the Norway European Economic Area model. Then there's the Swiss model. The more you go towards the right, the less close you are to the single market and to the customs union. Obviously, where we want to be is on the left. So we did in Food Drink Europe, we looked at what were the major trade flows between the EU 27 and the UK. And we looked at some of the major trade flows, amongst which there was Irish beef, there was Irish cheese, there was French cheese, French wine, Belgian chocolate, etc. We took some of let's say, the more traditional trade exchanges. And what we did then was, to the volumes that were exchanged, we applied the most favoured nation tariffs as applied by the WTO. We know that the average agricultural tariff is about 22%, but this can actually be as high as 80% and even more. And we then looked at what the impact would be of the World Trade Organization most favoured tariffs on increasing the prices of the exported goods, and therefore, of course, decreasing the exports per se. This in turn will have an impact on revenue, and it will therefore have an impact on jobs. So we looked actually all the way through, right down to the impact on jobs, and it's pretty frightening stuff. So I'm glad when somebody says Brexit can also bring opportunities and can also be good news, but our study certainly showed that it's going to be a real challenge. So as you can see here, French cheese the impact on French cheese will be 58%, on Irish cheese 56%, Irish beef 54%, etc., etc., etc. So it's really going to have a very, very important impact on the Irish food and drink industry. We also, I can also tell you that the Commission did some study on the impact of a price increase on exports in general in the food industry, and they showed that for every 1% increase in food and drink prices, the exports go down by about 5%. So if you look at something that's going to increase its price by 10%, you can multiply that by 10. 1% increase in food prices, exports down by 5%, and that's pretty scary. So here we go. This is the slide showing the rules and legislation impacting EU food and drink products. We are actually the area where there is the most legislation. The one on top is external relations, so that's not actually a product, but in manufactured products and goods, we are the area where there's the most EU legislation. You can imagine if fragmentation starts, if divergence in legislation starts, then we're really in trouble. So where will the Brexit really have an impact on EU regulation? First of all, on the common agricultural policy. Here there's a lot of discussions at the moment around funding. The UK, if it no longer funds the CAP, there will certainly be discussions around the CAP budget. Also, there are a lot of quality certification schemes like origin, product of various geographical origins, geographical indications, etc. What will happen there? General food law. Here, we're including all the secondary legislation. We have official food and feed controls. We have rapid alert systems. This is a hugely important system which actually alerts the whole of the European Union, 28, of when there's a problem, a fraud problem or a safety problem across the region. What about the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, etc., etc. And then, of course, customs issues, tariffs and non-tariff barriers are going to be really, really important. What's going to happen there? There's also a lot of soft legislation where there's a sort of a mixed competence between the UK or between the different member states and the European Commission. Will the UK adopt higher standards? Will it adopt lower standards? This will cause divergence, and what will that effect be on trade? Customs. This is really huge. When you think that the volume of traffic across the Channel every year is more than 4 million trucks, and that's something like 14,000 trucks per day. Where will these trucks go? I have heard of stories of between hundreds to thousands of kilometres of backup on the access roads to the ports. No port is currently equipped to look at these 14,000 trucks that will get blocked. They're not equipped, they don't have the manpower, etc. So if we have to examine the contents of each of these trucks, because the UK will be outside of the single market, outside of the customs union, that's really going to create some nightmares. We recently agreed on a modernised customs code. We have tariff and tariff quotas. We have rules concerning origin of products, various customs procedures, etc. What is going to happen to all this? All of these things today are actually question marks. Nothing has really been discussed in any detail, except perhaps the tariff rate quotas, where the UK has come up with this solution, which may or may not be accepted by the EU negotiators, of looking at the average of the 3 previous year imports and making that their part of the tariff rate quota, which they will then extract and maintain. I'm not quite sure this is either logical or fair, but we'll see what they come up with. Another thing I think we should mention here is when you're looking at working together as a union, it's already quite difficult to coordinate the work between the 28 member states. So trying to coordinate between the member states and with the UK when it's not inside the EU 27 is going to be another nightmare. We need dialogue. We need to be able to mutually recognise each other's products. We need to have a discussion around regulatory convergence. We need to discuss dispute settlement. There will be disputes. We have to know what to do with them. And some sort of cooperation mechanism or information exchange mechanism, etc., with the UK. This is really a slide concerning what the UK is going to have to do, so I'll skip it. What next? So we know that nearly all UK food law actually comes from the EU. It also has a relevance, EU food law has a relevance in the Europe Economic Area. For the UK, EU legislation still stands and will stand until they've actually exited. And one more. But there's also legislation in the making at the moment. What's going to happen there? There's a lot of food legislation which is still in the making, and we're not quite sure what's going to happen to it after Brexit. So potentially there are impacts. Paul Kelly mentioned it earlier on, both short-term and long-term. I think here the very important word is certainty. We really need certainty. Regulatory divergence could indeed become a huge non-tariff barrier, and the importance of transitionary agreements are really, and arrangements are really, really important. Regardless of the UK standards, whatever happens post-Brexit, any food exporter wishing to trade with the EU under any sort of free trade agreement has to comply with the EU 27 standards. This is currently the case. If you're an exporter outside the EU 28, to the EU, you have to comply with EU standards. So this is a fact, and the UK is going to have to live with it. So in summary, it's a strong and stable EU is really of huge importance to all of us. Any future EU-UK trade agreement must ensure minimal disruption, maximum collaboration on SPS measures and technical standards, minimum divergence in application of the standards, and the importance of strengthening and deepening the EU single market and an ambitious international trade agenda is really, really should be top of mind. What are we doing about it? We have set up working groups, even in anticipation of the Brexit vote last year. We have met with the Task Force 50, Mr. Barnier and his colleagues, several times. We have another meeting coming up at the end of this month. We've done our study, the study I mentioned. We're using that quite a lot in Brussels, and I think it was key to bringing forward the impact that Brexit is going to have on the food industry. We're working in partnerships with the chain, so we work with our upstream and downstream partners, with the farmers, with the retailers, very closely, and we come out with papers, with statements, with positions, which really have a major impact, I think, on the negotiators, because we represent a lot of people. The same with EFAT, which is the European Food, Forestry, Agriculture and Tourism Union. So we work with all of the employees, and together we're coming this hopefully by the end of October we will come together with a strong position on what the employers and employees in the food industry have to say to the negotiators. And of course we're following the developments very closely in Brussels, but that's where the fatigue comes in. It is a nightmare. Not one day passes without we're bombarded by articles, by positions, by more documents, by more meetings, by more conferences, and I think there is genuinely a fatigue. It's a pity because this is really an important issue. However, I think once again it seems to be more important in this part of the world than it is in Brussels. In Brussels, work goes on a whole lot of other issues as well, and so it's not that we're taking the backstage, but Food Drink Europe is really working very hard to ensure that the negotiators listen and they take all of our issues very seriously. It's a very interesting moment, and I'm crossing my fingers personally. You can bring the Irish person to Brussels, but you can't take the Irishness out of the Irish person. So I'm still following this very closely, also from an Irish point of view, and I'm just crossing fingers that we'll get it right in the end. So that's it. Thank you.